afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, I don't want to go over just because I was the one who said we needed to stay on time. I am Kristen Chesterman, as I said earlier. I am an instructional coach. This is my second year at TSC. Before that, I spent 19 years at Twin Lakes. Last 3 or 4 of those being a coach. Today was my kids' first day of school. So I was up bright and early with them, taking my kids to school. They go to Westside. I'm a Westside grad. So we moved back a couple years ago, and I got the job here. So we are today really just going to cover a topic that was really difficult for me coming from one school corporation to another. And I had no idea how different even between my 2 buildings were different, and then between 2 corporations. So we felt that maybe some of you guys might have those same kinds of questions, especially if you might be newer. So what I'm going to do is basically an overview of what we call everybody and what those roles are, touch a little bit on planning. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. But if this isn't the session for you, feel free to leave in the middle of it. It won't hurt my feelings at all. We want you to go to the sessions that are going to be most helpful. I'm going to start out with just this. Being an instructional assistant is one of the most challenging and rewarding jobs you'll ever have, and one of the most important. Instructional support is a constant presence in schools today, and an essential part of the learning process. In a recent blog post on a special needs website, they listed the 10 qualities of a great paraprofessional, and those are listed up there. Okay? Here's what I want you to do now. I would like for you to stand up. Put your things just on your seat or below your seats. And I would like for you, without talking, to make a line at the front of the classroom based on your number of years experience as an instructional support person. So you might want to think about that before you get in line. How many years have you been an instructional support? And it doesn't have to be at TSC. It could be in your lifetime. So down here in the front, without talking, see if you can get yourselves in order from, we'll go with least number of years down here to most number of years up here. You're pretty quick. Starting down here, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself with your name, number of years, and what school you're at, and what your role is there.
Tracy Raines, 1 year at Wyandotte here, and I was at ESL.
Sam Rodriguez, Battleground Elementary, 1 year. And not even 1 year. I was starting.
Okay. Sarah Heyman, I'm at Battleground as well, and I've been there a year as a Title I lead.
Okay. I'm Diana Lamberson. I'm at Mayflower, and I will be an interventionist this year.
Meredith Polish, 1 plus a little bit years. I'm at Leo Ridge Elementary, and I'm an interventionist this year.
Jill Edwards. I did 1 semester at Woodland Elementary as a special ed para, and then I did 2 years fellow at Outtakes.
Heather Crow, 3 years right here at Wyandotte, teaching day.
Shelley Crater at Leo Ridge, in the library for 5 years.
Okay, this is Will be my 5th year here. I'm now in instruction.
Marcy Newton, to my 6th year. I taught down in Georgia, and to my 2nd year at Wyandotte as an interventionist.
I'm Lisa Hodges. This is my 7th year at Battleground Elementary, but I'm at the intermediate now, and I'm a special ed para.
Okay.
Jennifer Starkweather, Leo Ridge, interventionist, and
John DePose, Leo Ridge Elementary. I've been there 9 years, and I've been one-on-one para, teacher's assistant, and resourceman, and this is my 1st year as interventionist.
Cheryl Cannon, and
Then I came and worked at Hershey, Oakland, and then I ended up at BGE.
Okay.
So.
Okay. My daughter was in the Logansport Children's Choir for years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When we lived in Monticello, we went back and forth. Yeah. It was excellent. Great. Spent a lot of time in Logansport.
Tammy Alford, I'm at BGE. I was at Klondike for 6 years, 7 years here at BGE.
Oh, my goodness.
I taught preschool for 5 years. I was at the developmental table.
Okay.
Adult counselor. I was at Greenbush Industries for years. And I was
Oh, excellent. Yeah, sure have. Yay.
I'm very much in the wrong spot because I know you ladies are around.
That's okay.
12 years as a para. That's with 2 years out that and then I came back again at BGE, BTI.
Okay.
Let's do the same thing with resources.
Okay.
Battleground Richard Jenkins, 20 years.
Excellent. Okay. One of the things I want to do today is besides giving you the information, I want to give you, as I'm basically teaching you, some strategies that you could also use. I know a lot of you are one-on-one or small groups, but occasionally when you do have those large groups, or when, something like this where they have to, even if you have a group of 5, having them without talking, getting up and getting an order for what it could be for whatever, whatever it could be, even to get to know each other a little bit, I'm going to add a little layer to that this time. So I'm going to have you guys sort of fold in. This is called the fold-in strategy. We're going to take the person at this end and the person at this end. You guys are going to be partners, and you're going to answer the question I have up there. When you get together with your partner, discuss which quality of those 10 you think is the most important, and just talk with each other about that. Okay? So you two can go ahead, and it doesn't matter where in the room you're at. The next 2 sort of fold in. Then the next 2. Yeah. Next 2, and you just keep matching up. Feel free, spread out. Next ones. Next ones. Yep. There we go. All right. It does work. Go ahead and discuss with your partner which of those qualities you think is most important. Okay. Anybody willing to share what they came up with? What do you think? Which one? Number 1, liking kids unconditionally. Well, they sure do. They sure do, definitely. It sure can. That very first interaction, as soon as they get off the bus, they may have had a horrendously bad morning. Anybody else?
So for me, it was kind of a little bit differently in that I kind of look at it as what I have trouble with and what would I like to work on.
Okay, interesting.
To back off and step in. So really kind of because working with the population of kids that I work with, I kind of want to do too much.
Yes.
And I sort of get that feeling based on that population, even sorry.
Sure.
And so it's hard for me to determine that when we step on. So I think those are 2 important things.
Absolutely. And absolutely, these are all 10 are important, And it was more than anything just to get that discussion started and to hear your thoughts in a small group environment for those kids who may not like to share in a larger group, getting them in a partner and just being, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Because everybody's got some sort of thoughts. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. The positive attitude. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, it goes back to they feed off of that as well. So, okay, thank you guys for humoring me a little bit. You may head back to your seats. And again, that's another thing as well. It's right after lunch. I know a lot of you have been here already, all day already. We need to get our kids up and moving as much as possible, okay? The way that I'm going to do this today is not the way that I would teach all the time, but we'll go with it. We'll go with it. All right. So today's focus, like I said before, is I'm going to go over the different support roles that TSC has. And then I'll have you guys do a little bit of, well, since we don't have tables, partner talk, group talk about that. We'll hit on lesson planning a little bit. The hardest part about that at TSC is every building and every one of your roles is very different. So I'm going to do that very broadly. I would love to be able to hand you a lesson plan template and tell you how to fill it out, and I just can't. Everybody's so different. Then we'll talk about communicating with the teachers, and hopefully if we have time at the end, I have a little activity called Your Numbers Up. Okay. Just a couple of things while I'm up here doing whatever. Please take care of your own comfort needs. As if you need to leave, it's not going to hurt my feelings. Ask questions. If you're not one who likes to raise your hand, okay, feel free to write them on a sticky note, and you can ask me later during a break or after the end of the session. Think about, as I'm going through this, how might you use this information? Okay, and most importantly, on any of these sessions, just know how much you are valued. Value yourself, value each other, and your commitment to teaching. At the end of this session, I'm going to ask you to think about three things. Something you learned, what surprised you, and maybe a question that you still have. Okay, so it sort of gives you a focus for a day. And again, that's something that you can do with some of your small groups, or some of you may be pulled in for some large groups sometimes. There's a strategy that you can use as well. All right, so we are going to start with our ESL tutors. I was really glad to see all the different types of tutors that we've had in here. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out, and pretty much on every slide, is when I started doing research on there, I sort of had a disclaimer. I realized that all 11 elementary buildings, everybody calls everything something different. Because what I first did was email a couple of my coach friends, said, so what do you call, the support staff at your building? And I got about 11 different answers. So I'm going to go with what the majority rules. If your building is different, I apologize. And for any of you, I am by far not the expert on all this. If any of you, especially those with that 20 years experience up there, you guys are awesome. Feel free to jump in with any other information you would like to add. Okay, so these descriptions are in general. Your school may be very, very different, okay? But I'm just sort of giving an overview. All right, so our ESL tutors normally are working with kids who have WIDA levels of 4.0 and below. Let me put that in English for those of you who don't understand that. WIDA is the test that we give our English language learners to see how well they can speak in English, write in English, and understand English, and read it. They are given a score up to 4.9. 4.9 is really considered your proficient. So anybody who's 4.0 and below gets services. Your ones would basically be can't really communicate in English. So those are who our kiddos are. Every ESL kid takes a WIDA test every year, and this year is maybe January, February that we did that because it takes so long to get the data back on that. So every kid has a WIDA number, and based on that number is then the level of support that they receive. Our goal is to help those students progress in their control of the English language. It's going to look very, very different because every kid is going to be at a different level. So instead of basing it on grade level groups, which they do try, they're really having to group them by what their WIDA score is. But they don't like to try and combine a fifth grader and a first grader when possible. Even if that fifth grader is maybe a level 3 and so is that first grader, the fifth grader doesn't want to be hanging out with the first grader. So they do try to do it as grade level as much as they can, and that's going to look very, very different. It could be small groups of all kids who are about the same level. It could be one-on-one, especially if there is a kid who is very, very low, or there's not any other kids at their level. It could be push-in support. If they need, especially in the content areas, they may need help with that background information, that vocabulary. For those people who are doing this job, this got very dicey as to what every school does differently. There is actually a kit that someone, is my understanding, that wrote at TSC that is out there. Does anybody here ever use it? Anybody have an ESL in here? You've used the kit? Okay, so it is out there and people use it. At the buildings that I was at, they didn't. So that's up to you and your buildings. Like I said, so then there may be other materials that you see fit, or sometimes the teachers have a request of something that they particularly would want you to work on. Okay? Any questions on an ESL tutor? Okay, so that's basically what they do. Okay? Then we have, and again, if it's a little off on what you're called, I apologize. I went with majority. Then we have our people who are in the resource room. You're basically servicing our special ed students in the resource room. You're providing them with academic assistance, could be behavior management, because that might be what the problem is, and or even some physical care if they're severe enough. Every special needs student has what's called an IEP, an individualized education plan, that needs to be followed. Sort of like ESL in that how much support they have depends on what their needs are. At TSC, and this is something very different from where I came from, there are 2 levels of support. You have your core kids who are pretty much in the resource room a good majority of the time. Then you have your supplemental kids who are in the classroom, but maybe with support from the para. That could be, it could look like they can have a writer that they tell you what to write and you would write it down. Doesn't necessarily mean they need to be out of the classroom for that, but they need some push and help for that. So that would be a resource room para. Again, within the resource room, you could be working with one-on-ones, you could be doing small group. Like I said before, you could be doing one-on-one in the classroom. Pretty much you're going to be directed by the special ed teacher as to who your schedule, who you're going to work with, when your breaks are, where you're going. Your schedules, bless your hearts, are sort of crazy. I think all your schedules are crazy, but special needs are all over the place because you've got the different grade levels depending on the size of your building. But you are pretty much working with our kiddos who have IEPs. Any comments or questions on that one? Okay. All right, so then we have our interventionists. This was another really difficult because at Twin Lakes we called these people something different. And it just took me after 19 years of breaking bad habits. So based on what I got from everybody else, for the most part, you guys are working with our below grade level students who are in the problem-solving process. The problem-solving process is where we think that they might qualify for special needs testing. But we have to have that documentation that shows that what we were offering in the classroom was not working. So we have to show that we supported those kiddos with other support outside of the classroom in a small group environment. And we have to show that we used multiple different measures. I know it gets very frustrating sometimes that you're like, well, they wanted 6 weeks of this, and then they wanted 6 weeks of this, and then they wanted 6 weeks of this. Yes, because we want to make sure that we have covered all of the bases and that maybe this kid needed this kind of support. Maybe it needed to be more visually based. Or maybe this kid needed a lot more phonics or phonemic awareness and we missed that somehow. So before we get them tested, we want to really make sure that we covered all that. That's where you guys come in. You're so important. And that can be in literacy and or math. Could be both. Could be one or the other. But that's where you guys are providing small group instruction, or it could even be one-on-one. There in the RTI process, there is Tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 is your whole class. Tier 2 is a small pull-out group outside of beyond what the classroom teacher did. Tier 3 is one-on-one support. And they would like to have all 3 of those shown in the documentation before they go ahead and test this kiddos. Every school has this looking so differently. Even at we're totally changing it up this year. Some of the things that you might be using might be something called an LLI kit. Anybody heard of that before? Okay, some of you? Okay. That's called a Leveled Literacy Instructions put out by Fontes and Pinnell. It is pretty much a kit that is scripted. Once you find out where the kid's level is through an assessment, it just takes you right through the lessons, and it tells you exactly what to do. It's wonderful. Some schools use something called Reading A to Z lessons. It's actually an online component. I see a couple people nodding their heads. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful resource. It's not all that expensive for schools to purchase, but everything is online. So that is really nice. For some of you, when you work with kids, your schools have you doing what's called a guided reading lesson, where you're taking a book and you're with a small group of kids and that book is at their level. You're doing a book introduction, you're introducing vocabulary, you're they're doing independent reading while you support them, you're asking them comprehension questions. At some schools, that's called a blitz, and you meet with those kids every day and do a small reading group with them. There was a program mentioned that I was not even aware of called Minds in Motion. Anybody use that here? Okay. Can you briefly explain what that is? Not briefly. Oh, okay.
And it's through motion that you get the child
Okay.
more centered in their learning.
Okay.
So you do a whole series of almost like obstacle course.
Okay.
We used to do that at Hershey, and like
Okay.
the whole classroom would run through the little obstacle course. So it's like a brain break.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that was mentioned in my research when I sent out my little survey. What do your interventionists use? That was something that came up. Not used at my buildings, but maybe we will. And depending on your building, and I'll be honest, the Title I buildings have a lot more resources to go to than the ones who don't. It's frustrating, and I get that. But there are tons and tons of intervention materials out there to help those kiddos. Okay. And as I said, whether you're called an aide, a para, instructional assistant, interventionist, whatever your building calls it, this is sort of the catch-all. Usually you are working with mostly students who are below grade level in reading and or math. You're basically there. These are your kids who are not identified. They're not in the problem-solving process, but yet they're not at grade level, and the teachers just need a little extra help because they've got 20-some-odd kids they're also working with, and we need to work together on that one. Again, that blitz reading instruction that I talked about before, where it's a small guided reading group, that could be what you might be doing. The LLI kit, some schools use that as their Tier 1, Tier 2 instruction. It could be you're given lesson plans by the grade level teacher, and you just do essentially what the teacher said in a specific time. I think is it Burnett Creek has star time? Something like that. I know that Mr. Gaybauer is implementing something similar at We Are Ridge called pause time, where it doesn't matter what the level kids are, we're going to be doing 30 minutes of some sort of extra support. It could be that you're pushed in for a set amount of minutes that you go in and just say, okay, I'm here, what do you need me for? Okay, and that can be at some buildings. I know the grade levels basically know that they have you for a certain amount of time, and they decide how they're going to use you. See some heads nodding. Again, it's all different. It's all different, but hopefully this gives you an idea about what may be going on in your school. And again, you may be doing pull-out groups as well. Okay. All right, then we have our technology aides, and they pretty much work with everybody for the most part. They're giving technology lessons in the computer lab. Sarah Marston is our new technology coach as of last year, and she did a phenomenal job of putting out lesson plans that were great for our kiddos, K through 5. And those she emailed those weekly to the aides, and they have basically it's a special. They have assigned class times, and when they're not in those times, a lot of times they're given duties to do as well. This bottom part was emphasized by quite a few people, keeping in mind that especially if you're new to that position, it might not always be that you're teaching tech stuff. You may be also asked to meet with groups or individuals to help meet those RTI plans. Because basically what happens is we just run out of hands and we run out of time, and we need 15 minutes extra with this kid 3 times a week with this particular program. And essentially we can look at the schedule and be like, who's got 15 minutes that we could possibly use? So I just throw that out there for those of you who might be new, that is a possibility, that if they need extra support, it could even be right before ISTEP time. Some people like to do a little extra blitz at ISTEP time. They could use you as part of that. Not usually anything that you have to come up with something out of the clouds. Usually you're giving something to do with them, but I like to just make sure that everybody's aware of that. We also have then our media aides. I heard several people in here who do that. Again, they're with all of our gen ed students, assisting the librarian in facilitating those library times, shelving of books. You also have assigned class times and just provide support as directed by the librarian. Sort of like our tech people, you could also be pulled to add some extra support if needed. But that's essentially where your spot is in the library. Some people, and I'll cover this also, duties come in there as well. Some of you have the lunch duty, the bus duty, the cafeteria duty, and that really depends on your building as well. I should throw that in there. I think I put that on a later slide. Okay. Then there is this one. This one was really new to me as well. If TSC has large class sizes of a certain grade, I'll use Mayflower as an example. Last year they had, I don't know, upper 20s at 3rd grade. And so instead, they essentially got one extra aide, supposedly, per classroom, if they could find one, per classroom to help that teacher out. And they call that a class size aide. And basically, because if I'm a teacher and I've got 29 kids running around, it is hard to do by yourself. Really hard to do. You are essentially there to provide support as directed by the classroom teacher and a principal. One, I guess, asterisk to that, to be real careful out, if you end up having to do that, or if that's one of your jobs, is to really be certain that you are aware of what are the expectations. Am I supposed to go with them to special? Or is that my prep time? Am I supposed to be running copies? Is that what the principal wants me to do? Am I supposed to be grading? Am I planning for something? Is there plan time in there? If I'm running a reading group to help you out, when do I get planning time for that? So just be very careful about your time. There's a lot of questions that came up that I didn't know the answers to, that a lot of the aides would come to me and be like, when am I supposed to plan for my groups? I don't know. And that needs to probably come from either your teacher or your principal, or maybe whoever is in charge of aides or instructional support at your school. Okay. Okay, I did throw this in here. Other responsibilities you may have just as an instructional support person at your school. Lunch duty. I don't know how many do lunch duty. Okay, recess. And then I know this is so frustrating, and I really feel for you guys, but sometimes we have to have class coverage that we don't need a full day sub for, or a half day sub, that there are ESL conferences that we only need for supposedly 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes they go an hour. That we need to have you cover, the aides cover classes. So there are times when you may be pulled, or if there's not enough subs. That happened, I don't know about some of your buildings, but that happened in my 2 buildings a lot. And you may walk in one morning and be like, you know what, you're not doing your classes today. You're going to be pulled for this teacher. Yeah, I'm nodding heads. We love you for it. we really do. And especially as a coach who, there's no time in the day for me, or even in the 9 weeks, for me to just sit down with my teachers and have a data meeting and go over their data. We're going to use NWEA. When can I help you to go through that data? So a lot of times we do pull coverage for that, and I really appreciate it. Okay, I want you to take, before we get to that, let's take just about 5 minutes to the people around you. Just sort of talk about anything, ideas, questions, whatever, or yes, we do that, no, how's your building do that, whatever. Just table talk it out for a couple of minutes with people next to you. Stand up, stretch, grab some water, whatever you're going to do, whatever you need to do.
Good or bad?
Where are you guys at?
Yeah.
Where are you? I'm at Mayflower.
Yeah, I know. Well, we have Kristen first week, so. Kristen best by the first week of school.
I heard she'll probably be our best by the first.
That is still a big question.
No, wait a minute, we did our first.